What's happening? Welcome to Riot Starter TV. We are back again for the second day in a row. Man, we have a huge show today. Matter of fact, you know what? Let me scratch that. Let's rewind this tape. We have two huge shows today. The first one, we're going to be dealing with fentanyl and the whole opioid crisis, because of the fact that we know that, you know, that the name is in the news a lot these days when it comes to drugs and overdoses and so on and so forth. So we have a dynamite author of a book called Fentanyl Inc. will be joining us by the name of Ben Westhoff. But I also want to point out before we get to Ben is that today is the 37-year commemoration of the MOVE bombing, the MOVE organization out in Philadelphia. On May 13th, 1985, the United States government dropped a bomb on a house containing men, women, and children, and 11 men, women, and children were assassinated on that day. So at 1:30 p.m. today, 1:30 p.m. EST, we'll be joined by Mike Africa Jr., a member of MOVE. Mike is a freedom fighter. You may have seen his film in regards to his parents, who were locked up for over 40 years themselves, and they both been released. But today is the commemoration of the MOVE bombing, so we will definitely be jumping on that at 1 p.m. But as I mentioned, our first guest is an author by the name of Ben Westhoff. He's an award-winning journalist and author. He had a couple different books, Original Gangsta and Dirty South, that he put out a few years back. But he has a book that's been making waves across the world, dealing with the whole fentanyl situation. It's called Fentanyl Inc. And it's talking about how some of these rogue chemists have created a recipe for disaster. So without further ado, I want to bring on a friend to our channel, Ben Westhoff. Ben, how you doing?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
No doubt. I appreciate you stopping through. We've been trying to do this for a few weeks, and it's been a few snafus, but we're here now. So definitely glad to have you on board. Before I get to the fentanyl situation, I want to talk about you had two books dealing with hip hop, Original Gangsta and Dirty South. Can you give us a brief on that? Because I mean, you don't look like the OG hip hop fan, but tell us about that. How those things come about?
Well, hip hop was my favorite music growing up, and my first book was about Southern rap. And I'm from St. Louis, and it was about the time that Nelly and Chingy were blowing up. And St. Louis isn't necessarily the South, but it was kind of that sound was taking over the whole country. And so, I went to Atlanta, interviewed people like, Lil Wayne and Outkast and Soulja Boy, all the, the big stars of the day. And then my next book, Original Gangsters, is about the West Coast, the birth of West Coast hip hop in LA, right around the time of the Rodney King beating, the Crips and the Bloods, the Eazy-E's Ruthless Records, segueing into Death Row Records. And, it's, I take a very journalistic approach to it and tried to find out like the real stories. 'Cause you hear so many, we've seen so many videos and heard so many rumors about, things like Suge Knight dangling, a Vanilla Ice over the edge of the balcony and things like that. So I like took a journalistic approach to find out what really happened in all these stories.
No doubt, no doubt. Nah, definitely. That's two interesting topics when you're talking about the West Coast and the Dirty South. So, that's a cool thing. I want to, you started off as a journalist, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with I know that you were reporting around the whole industry. How did first before I even go there, you know, fentanyl is huge, it's big, it's been around for a while, but we've been hearing more about it over the past I would say really few years when it comes to just on a mainstream level as far as I would say the Black community. What tell us what exactly is fentanyl?
Fentanyl you can think of as sort of like synthetic heroin. So like heroin, comes from the opium poppy and it's grown in a field and it's processed. But for fentanyl, you don't need to do all that. They just make it in a lab. And so fentanyl, it's used the same way as heroin. It can be shot, it can be smoked, it can be snorted, but it's much, much stronger. So it's something like 50 times stronger. So enough fentanyl to kill you is like basically the size of like 2 grains of rice.
Wow.
And so the thing is like most people don't want fentanyl. Most people don't seek fentanyl out, but drug dealers cut it into all different drugs to as a cost saving device. It's like to cut it, so because it's so much cheaper. And so nowadays you can hardly find any any heroin that's not cut with fentanyl, and even drugs like cocaine, methamphetamines, and pills, especially. Like nowadays, if you get a black market pill, it could look exactly like a Xanax or an OxyContin or a Percocet, but there are strong odds that it will actually have fentanyl in it.
Wow. So let's talk about, because we're going to definitely tap into the laboratories and where it is now, how it's coming around at this particular time. But what are the origins? Where did fentanyl come from originally?
Well, it was originally a hospital drug, and it still is. But it was created for like open heart surgery for people with cancer in kind of the late stages of life. It's a painkiller, a really strong painkiller. And like when men get colonoscopies, they're actually given fentanyl. And when women have an epidural in childbirth, they're given fentanyl. So it has like real legitimate uses. But the difference is that when it's used in a hospital, they have anesthesiologists who are trained to measure the exact right amount of the dose. When it's being used on the street, people don't know what they're doing. And that's, it's impossible to mix it up just by hand. Like I talked with fentanyl dealers who like would mix up heroin and fentanyl using a coffee grinder, and that's just not scientific. And so you get hot spots. So you get all these, like you could take one dose and you'd be fine, but the next dose would be too much fentanyl and it would kill you. So if you're getting fentanyl in a hospital or for pain or something, you don't have to worry. It's just buying fentanyl off the street. That's the problem.
Okay, so it was created in a lab, right?
Yeah.
What year? And we know it was a scientist. Who was this mad scientist who thought that it would be a better drip than morphine?
Yeah, that's right. His name is Paul Janssen. He was a Belgian chemist in the late 50s. And yeah, he was trying to create something that was better than morphine that came on faster. And he never lived to see all the true damage of fentanyl. It took a long, long time for fentanyl to get out into the recreational market, because scientists were not worried about it, and the government wasn't worried about it because they said, well, this stuff is so potent that, users wouldn't want to use it because it's so likely to kill you. But it's only been in about the past like eight, 9 years that it finally made that jump into the everyday users on the street market, and ever since then it's caused the worst drug overdose. Kills more Americans than any drug in history now.
Wow. Wow. So let me ask you this. I mean, because again, you started off uh, as a music journalist. What brought fentanyl on and as far as on your radar, and what made you say, "Look, I need to research this, and I'm gonna." I know you didn't just wake up one day and say, "You know what? I think I'll write a book about fentanyl." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I was the LA Weekly music editor. And so we were writing about people dying at raves. So there were all these raves happening and people were always dying. And then the newspapers always reported that they died from ecstasy. And so, I thought that ecstasy was supposed to be a pretty safe drug. I didn't know, it didn't make sense to me that it was killing so many people. So I started looking into that, and it turns out that there was no more pure ecstasy. And that's still, pretty much true. All of the so-called ecstasy is cut with all these other drugs. And one of them was fentanyl. And this was like 2016, 2017. And I never really hardly heard of fentanyl. But then I started to realize that this was the real problem. This was like the deadliest drug. And so I kind of put my other project to the side and just focused specifically on fentanyl.
Wow, that's bananas. So you said, and I remember all of those rave deaths, and they were definitely saying, they were ODing on X and all of that, and I mean, I thought it was wild myself because I mean, I wasn't a user of ecstasy, but I didn't have, no one I knew or had heard of was, I mean, they didn't have those type of results. So that's an interesting observation. So you talk about synthetic drugs, and you talked about how a lot of these drugs are used. Fentanyl is used for a lot of these drugs. What about weed, marijuana? What's the do you see that as a possible way for folks to cut that as well, or?
No, that's like the one drug that I think is actually safe. And the reason is there's no profit incentive to cut it into marijuana. So if you can smell the buds and you can see them, if it smells right, if it looks right, it's going to be fine. Once in a while with these like vape cartridges, like the sauce and stuff like that, they've had some instances where they like use a cheap liquid to like dilute it, and there's been some deaths with that. So but if we're talking about actual marijuana buds, then there's been no credible cases with fentanyl adulterating that. Same with, I think, like magic mushrooms. Like it's the same situation. And also from what I understand, fentanyl burns at a different temperature, at a higher temperature. And so I think if you were smoking marijuana that had fentanyl in it, it would burn off at a different rate or something. But yeah, I don't think you need to worry about it.
And you said that like a true weed head. You was like, look, when you grab the bud and you look at it, and the colors are right, and your eyes lit up like you was just, you was ready for it. I'm with you though, Ben. Ben was like,
right. Yeah, I can tell the difference myself.
No doubt, Ben. Like, don't mess with the weed. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so we're talking about, you said there's a whole lot of synthetic pieces going around. I understand that Ben was so gangster. You not only put your project aside, you said you were going to take a trip to China. Tell us about your trip to China and your findings, and why China.
Yeah, well, all of the fentanyl that's sold on the streets is made in China, and so I was curious about this, and there was like nothing written about it. No one knew anything about it, and so I started Googling like buy fentanyl from China, and all these websites came up for these labs, and they had their phone numbers and their emails, and they said, if you know, if you want to buy fentanyl, just contact us. And so I did. I made a
Wait,
fake.
wait. On the, I mean, is this like you said? This is black market, or
No,
is
no,
this
this
just a
is right on
regular?
the clear web. It's, you know, it's not even on
Wow,
the dark web.
wow.
They mostly got rid of it now, but just a few years ago, yeah, you could contact them. And I made up a fake email, and I said I was a drug distributor, and that if I came to China, could I see their labs? And some of them said yes. And so I flew out to Wuhan. You know, this was right before the pandemic. So
Right. So you brought it back here. No, I'm fucking with you. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, it was me. You know, a lot of people though have wondered. You know, so much fentanyl comes from Wuhan. Coronavirus came out of Wuhan. I get all these conspiracy theory people that are like, is this all the same master plan? And I don't think it's that, but I do think that Wuhan is like the epicenter of the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical industry for China. And so they have all these trained chemists who have like PhDs, but they have gone off the path, and we're making fentanyl. And so I went into these labs. I saw one that was like, you know, it really, I was expecting like a Mexican cartel situation with like guys holding AK-47s guarding the door and this and that, but it wasn't like that at all. It was super professional, kind of like lab, very legitimate seeming business. It looked, you know, like the Breaking Bad kind of lab, you know, the Bunsen burners and the glassware. And but at the same time, there was kind of like a Tony Montana aspect to it too, because they had all these piles of fentanyl powder and synthetic marijuana powder just sitting on tables, you know, and it was like for bagging up to be sent out all over the world. And it was really crazy to me because, like I said, remember, just a tiny bit of fentanyl is enough to kill you. And they had just like kilos and kilos and kilos and kilos. And so it's hard to believe.
Were you all have masks, or was it just, I mean, how did that work?
What's that?
You said the piles of it. Did you all have masks, or how did that work? I mean, was it behind a glass, or what was the deal with that?
No, it was just like drying. Like they start out as these mixtures, and I saw them like rotating. They're heated up. They're like they're mixed for, I don't know, hours or days, and then they have to be like dried out to form the powder. And so they were just sitting on these tables drying out, and then I would see like big buckets of just 1 kilo bags tied up and for shipping. And the crazy thing was that it was legal. You know, it was all legal because in China, these different fentanyl products were legal. In the U.S., they were illegal, and so that's what kind of fueled the whole market.
So when you give us a picture, you mentioned the whole Bunsen burners and all that type stuff. When you walk into the spot, I mean, and how were you? Were you like wired up? Were you mic'd up? Or
yeah,
like,
I was. I did have my recorder. They said no pictures. You know, I think the guy really wanted to believe I was actually a drug distributor, but he spent the whole morning vetting me, the owner of this lab. So we like met up at this train station, and then he took me to his apartment and, you know, asked me questions. Then we went to lunch, and at one point he was like, "So are you a journalist?" You know, and I was like, "Nope." You know, I was like,
get your fingers crossed.
I was like, yeah, nope. But finally I convinced him, you know, and so he got his driver, and it was like this guy that looked kind of like a muscle. He was like a big beefy dude who was driving, and we went like a half an hour outside of Shanghai. And then when we got to the spot, it was basically like a little business office park. You know, there was like, he had his card at the gate, and then the mechanical arm went up, and we went in, and it looked like it could have been any kind of business, you know, like a grocery chain distribution warehouse or something. And it wasn't until we got inside, the smell was kind of overpowering. It was the middle of winter. They had all the windows open. the guy like put his shirt over his nose because the smell was so strong. But really, it was a pretty small lab. There were like 5 or 6 employees there, maybe, and it looked like a high school chemistry lab, really. Except for all the just bags and bags of all the chemicals.
It's crazy. So and I want to get back on that, but you mentioned synthetic marijuana,
Mm-hmm.
synthetic weed. Tell us about that, because and now is this something that's floating around, or what's the deal with that?
Well, it's known as K2 or spice. Have you ever heard of
Okay.
those?
Right.
Yeah. And so it's not really like marijuana at all. It's again, it's a synthetic drug, and it's like a chemical that's sprayed on plant matter, like sage. So they used to sell this stuff at like head shops and even maybe gas stations, and it would say not for human consumption.
Mm.
And the thing is, it's not like the effects aren't like marijuana at all. It's like super turbocharged, and you can see all these videos on YouTube with people taking K2 and spice and just like losing their minds. It's not pleasant stuff at all.
Right. So they were pushing both of these things. So
Yeah.
what was the end results? You're in the lab, you're hanging out, and I mean, where did you go from there? Did you just high five and say peace, thanks for sending us through, or how did it work from there?
Well, at the end, they took me in the conference room and they kind of tried to put the hard sell to, they gave me the prices and asked me what I wanted to buy. And I basically said I had to go back to my partner and see, we would decide together and I would get back to them. And then I just like pieced out, like they drove me back and they said, "What hotel are you staying at?" And I didn't want to tell them what hotel I was really staying at, so I had to make something up. I made up this like fake, address, and they just dropped me off there. And then I went to my real hotel, and then I just got out of town. I like took the next bullet train to Beijing, just because I was worried about them finding out about me, and so nothing ever happened after that.
Okay. So I understand that the CEO now has a bounty on his head, or I'm saying bounty, but
That's
he's
right.
wanted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is actually a different organization that was this huge company with like 700 employees that made fentanyl ingredients, and his name was Yeshuan Fa, and there's a $5 million reward out from the U.S. government for information leading to his capture.
Wow. So when you got back, the information you gathered, that was the basis or the foundation for the book itself, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's it's also, I interviewed dark web dealers from the U.S., from Europe. It's also about the situation on the ground. And so, you mentioned the effect on the Black community. I think when the opioid crisis began, it was seen as like a white problem, and like the OxyContin pills, all that stuff. That was the first wave of the opioid epidemic. And so the second wave was heroin. So like when people had all these pills prescribed and their prescriptions ran out, they started just going to get street heroin. And then, but eventually there was no pure heroin anymore, and it was all cut with fentanyl. That's the third wave. So the third wave is the one that's affecting African American communities the hardest. And now it really has become like that, like in places like Missouri, where I live, Black men are being affected more than anyone else. And, it basically comes down to, for one thing, fentanyl is just being cut into everything. There's, people think that people might have been like addicted to heroin for decades, decades and decades. And, they were living with it. They were getting by. But all of a sudden, when fentanyl is there, it's just one dose and they die. The second problem is that there's just not a lot of access to treatment facilities in a lot of African American communities, and there's not a lot of outreach, and so you have a lot of people who just aren't getting the help they need at all.
So let me ask you, how from your research, how does fentanyl make its way from Wuhan to Washington, D.C., or to Brooklyn, or to Atlanta, or to St. Louis? How does that happen?
It gets shipped over on these big barges, these big boats, in these shipping containers. So, like I keep saying, fentanyl is so tiny, it could be one suitcase worth that has 2 million doses in it. And so hiding that in a giant shipping container, it's like no one's going to find that, even if they are searching for it, which they're probably not. So that arrives in Mexico, and the Mexican cartels control the ports. And so the Mexican cartels take these raw ingredients, they process them, they cut it down further, and then it's shipped across the border into the U.S. And then there are all these various distribution networks that take it all across the U.S.
Mm. So you mentioned one of the things you mentioned was that was it correct? Did I hear you correctly when you said that it was legal in China as far as the ingredients?
Yeah, it is. That's correct.
Okay, so why did they feel why was it so necessary to vet you if it's legal? I mean, is there some type of trade law, or what was the deal with that?
Well, I think they know that they don't want bad publicity, and that the Chinese government, totalitarian government, can change the law at any time. And so these companies just want to operate, make money quietly under the radar. They don't want any publicity. I actually was worried more about the government because I was there on a tourist visa. I was told that if I got a journalist visa, the government would follow me around, wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. So I was worried that I could, get thrown in like a Chinese jail or something.
Right. That's wild. Whoo, that this is serious. I want to ask, you mentioned that it's still being used in hospitals. It's legal, so on and so forth. How does big pharma benefit? Is it a serious prescription thing going on as well, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's definitely, we hear a lot about Purdue Pharma, who are the makers of OxyContin, and they basically told people that this OxyContin was less addictive. They had all these marketing that got people hooked, and this really helped start the opioid crisis. When it comes to the companies that make fentanyl, there are some like Johnson and Johnson that do make a fentanyl patch, but that's more like I don't think those companies have been criticized as much. I think there's a lot to, there's definitely big pharma involved with like the treatment of opioids. So you might have heard of methadone, and there are these different treatment drugs, and sometimes some people think that the cure is worse than the disease. Like methadone is, some people say, is even more addictive than heroin or fentanyl, and it's helped a lot of people for sure. But there's definitely a lot of money being made behind it, and you can't get methadone just from a clinic. You can only get it by just from your regular doctor. You can only get it at these special clinics where you line up every day. You can only get a dose for one day. So the people who are on it, often they can't leave town. They can't hold a job because they always have to be there at this special time. So there are other, opioid treatment drugs too. But I think a lot of people think that big pharma is the profit motive is getting in the way of like really helping people.
You mentioned Johnson and Johnson. You said they have a fentanyl patch. So
Yeah.
they're in the the vaccine game, and I mean, what's up with that, man? You went from baby powder to I mean, how long has this been? How long have they been involved in that particular industry? Do you
Well,
know?
they actually bought the company from the founder of fentanyl. That guy I was talking about, Paul Janssen. So his company called Janssen Pharmaceuticals, they bought it not long after fentanyl was invented. And so, yeah, there's definitely some shadiness with that. Like fentanyl wasn't even supposed to be approved in the US because the people on the FDA thought it had too high of an addiction potential. But then, like Paul Janssen himself, the inventor, kind of lobbied them and said, we'll dilute it. It won't be so bad. And then the DEA itself also really underestimated the problem. Like, I found these DEA reports from like 2015, 2016 that basically said like, there's nothing, fentanyl is not a problem. Don't worry about it. And then only 1 year later, it was killing more people than any drug in American history.
Wow, wow. So what has been the response on your book? I mean, how has it been received? Have you had any issues with it, or everything's just been smooth sailing? Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people are just, I hear from a lot of grieving parents, like there's so many kids who are getting killed and who are dying from this. And people, I talk about like, it's a bad time to be a young person, like in your early 20s, your teenage years. Like when I was that age, I would like, take whatever, if someone gave it to me. But nowadays, like if you did that, if you snort a line at a party, you think it's cocaine, it can just kill you. You take a pill and someone is like, well, this looks like a prescription pill, it must just be, my mom takes Xanax. So, it must be safe and it could just kill you. So I've done a lot of speaking for, groups with young people and groups with addiction. A lot of people like have gotten really mad about China and they, blame China, but and talk to me about that. But like, China says, well, first of all, we don't have the problem here. In China, people aren't addicted to fentanyl and aren't doesn't have this problem. And they're like, the U.S. needs to get its own problem under control and stop blaming us.
So, in the chat, one of our folks was asking about U.S. and Canadian fentanyl productions. How does that work? Are you saying that the actual ingredients is coming from China, or are you saying that the whole throw is coming from China? I'm trying to figure out.
No, if it's used in hospitals, if it's medical fentanyl, it's not made in China. It's made in usually the U.S. and Europe.
Okay, so but you're saying most or all?
All the street fentanyl, all the illicit fentanyl comes from China. And there is some diversion, some hospital, like if you go on the dark web, you can find people selling fentanyl patches and stuff like that. But by far the most illicit fentanyl is from the Mexican cartels via China.
So what's the numbers looking like? Because you said it's like, did you say 50 times deadlier than heroin?
Yeah, that's right. And the problem just keeps getting worse and worse. I mean, since my book came out, they just announced the new figures. It was more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdose deaths in 2021. And the majority of those were from fentanyl. So every year, people say, well, it's as bad as it could get. And then it just gets even worse.
So when these deaths are reported, it's usually based on that mix. You're saying like a fentanyl death can be, it wasn't necessary that they didn't necessarily just go seek out fentanyl. It could have been in some cocaine or in some heroin or whatever, but it's classified, that death is classified as such, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, okay. And that's very interesting because I hear so many folks talking about fentanyl deaths, and it would, if you didn't know any better, you would think that it's just them popping pills, and and that's the reason behind it. So it can be snorted, injected, uh smoked, and all of this. Okay, so that's a real serious thing. Man, I definitely appreciate you coming on and educating and informing our audience on what's going on. Um, what is the from a political standpoint? What are some of the things that's been done to stop it, or is it possible that some of these folks are in cahoots with this trade here in the States?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about like in cahoots with China, and I know that like the Mexican sort of government is sort of stopping this to wage this battle against the cartels the way they did before, and maybe that's for the best. So many people are getting killed every year by the cartels in this turf war and everything. But I don't know. I mean, I tend to lean more towards legalization, decriminalization, um, and there's a movement called harm reduction, which seeks to do that and to kind of like not lock people up, for nonviolent drug offenses. And Joe Biden is kind of moving in that direction, like very slowly. And I think that's the best way. You have Narcan, which is the reversal miracle drug, the nasal spray. If somebody overdoses on any opioid, pills, heroin, fentanyl, if they get this nasal spray called Narcan, it brings them back to life. And so we're starting to see more funding for that. Fentanyl testing strips, which it's just like a little pregnancy test, a little paper strip, and you put it in your mixture of drugs. It can tell you immediately if there's fentanyl in it or not. More funding is arriving for that. And so, but all of this is, the problem is just getting worse and worse. I mean, I think education, kind of like what you're aiming for is probably the most effective tool we have right now, just because most people, like you were saying, don't even know what fentanyl is, don't know the risks out there. So
Do you feel the U.S. government has any involvement in the distribution? Of course, in the past, we've seen a whole lot of things happening.
with crack cocaine, yeah, in the whole Iran Contra scandal, I've written about that, and how Freeway Rick Ross ended up, kind of like being empowered to distribute crack in South Los Angeles and places like that. But it's hard for me to. I mean, the CIA has like been found to have its hand in so much dirty business and so much like spreading of the drug trade around the world. It usually doesn't come out until much after the fact. So if they were involved this time, I wouldn't be surprised. But it's not clear to me how exactly the U.S. government would be involved this time.
Right on. I definitely appreciate that answer. You have another book coming out any day now, probably like today or this week or whatever. Tell us about your latest work.
Thank you. Excuse me. It's called Little Brother. It's a book about the killing of my mentee in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. So I was paired with an 8-year-old kid named Jarrell Cleveland, who lived in Ferguson, just outside of St. Louis here, and we were together for 11 years, and we're very, very close until he was killed outside, near his home in Ferguson in 2016. And he was killed in broad daylight there was a witness, but the police never arrested anyone. The case went cold. And so finally, I used my skills as an investigative journalist to try to figure out who killed him. And eventually I did figure out who killed him. And so this book, Little Brother, it's about our relationship. It's about the history of St. Louis, how, Ferguson got to be the way it is. And it's about this kind of true crime case about me finding out who killed him.
Mm-hmm. And how old was he when he was murdered?
19.
19 years old. Okay. And your book drops when is Little Brother?
It comes out in just 1 week, so it's available already for pre-order.
Cool. And how can folks get Fentanyl Inc.?
You can find it on Amazon or any book selling site, and bookstores should have it, but you might want to call first. But yeah, if you just Google my name, Ben Westhoff, or you Google Fentanyl Inc., it should come up.
Right on. Definitely appreciate you stopping through and rocking with us today. Any final words for the audience?
No, but thank you for having me on, and I appreciate your questions. And it sounds like you've got a great budding empire here. So good luck with everything.
Right on, man. Definitely appreciate you. Good luck with your new project, and we'll definitely have you back to talk about Little Brother soon.
Sounds good.
Right on, man. Have a good day. We appreciate you, Ben.
All right.
What's happening, y'all? Riot Started TV. That was Ben Westhoff. And I know many of you have questions on the whole fentanyl situation. Definitely check it out, subscribe, so on and so forth, share with your folks. And we will have lined up in the near future a number of different investigative journalists who will be speaking on different subjects and topics. So make sure you tune in to Riot Started TV. 1:30 p.m. EST. Today, as I mentioned, we will have Mike Africa Jr. on. And Mike Africa Jr. will be speaking on the 37-year commemoration of the MOVE bombing. And for folks who don't know about the MOVE bombing, of course, the MOVE organization out of Philadelphia, they were vamped on several times. The first time, August 8th, 1978. And and then again on May 5th, May 13th, 1985. So it's the 37-year commemoration. So we would definitely be digging into that. I appreciate your work. Appreciate you checking us out, and do me a favor, share this joint. I have a whole gang of interviews lined up. We have some real powerful people. Some of these folks you're going to know and love, but I'm trying to make sure that before I hit you all with too much, that that we're getting out what needs to be out. So definitely appreciate you all. Stay on point. Support our organization, the FTP movement. That is my particular organization. We're going on our 18-year commemoration on June 9th. We'll have a number of different things going on with that. But check me out again at 1:30 p.m. today. We appreciate you all. And check out the content this weekend. We have, I'm sure Jackie Lukman will be coming on at 7. Burn It Down, Kim Brown. I'm not certain of the time that she comes on, but definitely check her out. Tomorrow we have my brother Balogun. I'm actually a guest on his show tomorrow on Warrior Class. So make sure you check it out and continue to support what it is we're doing. Stay on point, stay ready for revolution. You've been watching Riot Started TV right here on Black Power Media. Be safe, and I'll see you all at 1:30. Peace.